We all know that texting and driving don't mix. But what about texting in the classroom? In what ways can mobile device use influence your ability to process and retain new information? Hello there, this is Bradley, and you're listening to Psych Everywhere, a podcast by Psychi, the International Honor Society in Psychology. For this show, distinguished guests weigh in on applying psychology findings to a diverse range of contemporary issues and bettering your life. Today's guest speaker is Dr. Sinyan Lee, an associate professor of psychology at the University of Arkansas at Monticello. Dr. Lee is an educational psychologist who has published research on cell phone addiction and learning, cell phone use and emotion regulation style on college students' learning, and even how fear of being without our cell phones affects the youth population. In the Psychi world, she has also served in many ways. Dr. Lee is the Southwest representative of the Psychi Diversity Committee. She has served on the Southwestern Regional Steering Committee and the Psychi Research Award Committee for SWPA. She received the Regional Psychi Faculty Advisor Award in 2017. She is a recurring contributor for Psychi's Psych in the Headlines series led by Dr. Sean Charlton. And last but not least, in January 2021, she was selected as the first ever director of the new Psychi Faculty Support Committee. We'll talk about the goals and opportunities of that particular committee sometime later on in this episode. I think listeners interested in today's topic of texting and learning will likely be interested to learn about that committee as well. Dr. Lee, welcome to Psych Everywhere.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I was kind of looking through some of your articles online, and it looks like you've done so much stuff on cell phone usage. What are there, like 5, 6 articles now that you've published on that?
That sounds just about right. Yes, 5 to 6,
Wow.
Maybe 7, because the last one will be published sometimes in next year. So
Great. Well, I've kind of arranged my questions today to sort of touch on a bunch of those, at least the ones that are published. So right now, I am going to turn off my cell phone because can you imagine if my cell phone was ringing in an episode about texting?
Awesome.
Okay. So obviously cell phone use can affect learners in the classroom in a lot of ways. Could you just kind of get us started? Go over some of the ways that you found in your own work. I'm thinking like decreased attention, subsequent memory, and even emotion regulation.
Well, cell phones become an inevitable part of our lives even before the pandemic. But teachers, policymakers, and caregivers have reported those also impair academic performance. So that actually brought out our 2017 study because how to set up cell phone policies became a concern for many educators, including myself. But little has done how different cell phone policies affect classroom learning. We talk about texting and driving, and it's shown that you shouldn't drive while you're texting, but no experimental has been done in classroom settings. So we conducted experimental research, how 4 different cell phone conditions actually affect the student's test score. And those 4 conditions were, it's okay to use your cell phone, it's okay to have your cell phone, but please make it in the silent mode, which has to do with the movie theater policy. And then there's also conditions that no matter what, we strictly prohibited the cell phone usage. So put it in a secure place before lecture begins, and you may pick up yours after you are done with the lecture, which we call a cell phone restricted condition. And then we also have our control group, which has no cell phone policy. So based on those conditions, we basically hypothesized that those who have their cell phones are more distracted and perform poorly on the test. At the same time, we also brought up our hypothesis that individual differences in emotional regulation styles like obsessiveness, nomophobia, which has to do with one's fear of losing cell phone, and mindfulness may moderate the impact of cell phone policy conditions on test performance. So we basically use Anacoba to compare our dependent variable which is our test score by levels of a factor variables controlling for a continuous covariate. And our findings actually show that those in cell phone restriction group performed the best. So there was a significant main effect of the instruction type on test performance. So the first hypothesis was supported, but there was no difference in test performance was found based on emotional regulation style. So that makes us actually think a little further. And then we conducted another study focusing on attention and learning. And this time, we would like to see how cell phone disrupt attention as well as learning, which actually came out as 2018 study. There were a number of studies we found that the mere presence of a cell phone diminishes attention, but how it affects test performance was pretty much our research question. So we actually would like to examine whether nomophobia stands for no mobile phone phobia, okay, which has to do with the fear of losing a cell phone, affects learning. So we actually did our analysis and found out that the quiz performance was critically impaired by cell phone possession, and that also affected their nomophobia level and also their objective distractibility. So to be specific, we divided it into 4 quarters of the lecture time and found that the memory declines in test performance happens during the 3rd quarter of lecture. So basically when they actually hit half of the time and the toward near by the end, then their attention seems to be losing it. And then we also have found that one of the 4 subscales of the nomophobia questionnaire, which represent one's anxiety for giving up convenience of one's cell phone, show the strongest effects with 3rd quarter quiz performance. So definitely it has to do with the decreased attention, and then that actually affects subsequent memory. And it turns out that in terms of emotional regulation, there is some effect to actually bring up the nomophobia level if they don't see their cell phone or if they're not allowed to use their cell phone.
I like to ask basic like methodology questions sometimes. When I read these empirical papers, a lot of the time I think the method section is the most interesting, right? Like what creative way did they find to answer a question? So I guess using, let's say, the 2020 study you did on how cell phone addiction explains how cell phone impair learning, could you use that study as an example and sort of give me a brief overview of how did you test that?
Yeah, so those are 2 studies actually gave us the stepping stones to make our 2020 study. Altogether, 2 reasons why we conducted the study were, first, Dr. Ian McDonough at University of Alabama and I actually thought it is very important to connect cognitive psychology principles to real-world problems. So we wanted to have some better understanding how cell phones impact learning in the classroom. We thought that this would be really worthwhile problem to tackle. Second, as a professor who teaches regularly myself, especially in the big lecture format like Intro to Psychology, I often wonder about how well my students are learning in the presence of their digital technology like cell phones and smart devices. So in 2020 study, we actually had one experimental condition called the cell phone allowed group because it's a college. Most likely professors is not going to actually take their cell phone out as the way that we did in 2017. So we allowed our students to have their cell phone for academic purpose and actually compared with our control group to make it more realistic. And participants were in the Bing lecture hall, and during the lecture, we have our research team to actually sending out anonymous text message to their cell phones during the time. And then we actually measured their distractions to see that how degree of a distraction actually affect their learning. We also had a quiz shortly after the lecture and also asked them to fill out different types of cell phone addictive behavior measures, like the Nomophobia questionnaire was definitely one of them. We also had the smartphone addiction scales and mobile phone problematic usage skills, cell phone overuse skills, and fear of missing out. So this time we really wanted to see cell phone impaired behavior affects the learning. So those measures were used to see that how those actually affect and then whether certain main effect actually mediates between independent and dependent variable. But basically what we wanted to see is first distraction effect, second mediation effects of cell phone anxiety, addiction, and disconnection on quiz performance, and lastly, mediating effects of cell phone policy on quiz performance. So as you actually see how the study goes, mediation analyses were conducted to model both direct and indirect effects of a single and sequential pathways. And from there, our findings show that the distraction in noticing a test might have been the cause of distraction rather than the time it took to check and engaging in texting. We've also found that cell phone addiction and anxiety are either moderately or strongly correlated to one another. So there is a correlation in between. We also investigated whether degree of distraction mediates between cell phone measures we use and question performance. And we found that some of them are actually showing that mediation effect, but others are not really. For example, degree of distraction mediated the effects of cell phone addiction on quiz performance in mobile phone problematic usage, but there was no mediation effect was found in other measures. So altogether, we found that the prediction that cell phone related addiction but not anxiety or disconnection was a potential mechanism of distraction and poor quiz performance. And we hope to actually expand our study further.
It sounds like a fun study to conduct. I'm just trying to picture sitting there and sending participants messages throughout the... So what kind of messages did they send to them? I think that's interesting.
Oh, it was a really common communication, like number one, hey, are you there? Are you in Chick-fil-A? That was the second. Are you coming? And then, hey, are you actually getting my message? Then at the end, we were saying, sorry, we got the wrong number. So those are the main 5 text messages that we sent, which could be really common that happen in daily life.
I love it. Are you at Chick-fil-A? More likely than not, I would have said, well, yeah, I am.
Actually, some of them did. So our research team actually had so much fun by texting those messages. So that was an enjoyable part.
I bet. So you've already mentioned nomophobia, no mobile phone phobia, and that you've authored some papers on that. What are the effects of banning a phone from a person with nomophobia? Does it go over well?
That is a very good question. And then I would like to actually tell you this. I think there are 2 types of banning. One has to do with prohibiting the usage of a cell phone, but allowing them to possess it. And another banning will be completely out of sight. So not only you're prohibiting the usage, but you're not allowed to bring it. So you're also prohibiting the possession. In September 2018, children in France were prohibited to bring their smart devices when they are at school. And this phone ban also applies to my son's middle school in Arkansas, except for disabled students who really need it for pedagogical use. In 2010, they allowed it to bring the smart devices for academic use, but in 2018, they changed it. So that began from France and the United Kingdom. And even for my own child, he used to bring smart devices when he was 6, but then pandemic happened. But then when he started in 8th grade this fall, he was not allowed to bring his cell phone. It should be at home. Which I also found an interesting study from South Korea. Dr. Seo, who is the professor of neuroradiology at Korea University, and his research team actually conducted a study on teenagers with the internet and smartphone addiction, demonstrate that their brains has a higher level of a neurotransmitter that slows down neurons, which results in decreased level of control and attention. So that makes us render people more susceptible to distractions. There was also another study in Britain indicated that the phone ban in schools brought a clear improvement in students' test scores. So now they have empirical findings why they are pushing phone ban.
Who are people with nomophobia? Is there a certain group of people that are more likely to experience that?
I've seen studies that those who actually have a high level of anxiety have some correlation with having nomophobia, but more studies needed whether that correlations are still showing some other settings. In fact, nomophobia is not really a part of DSM manual, although there has been ongoing debate whether this phobia has to be a part of a mental disorder category or not. So research has been still ongoing to figure out whether there's some correlations with other development ability, and then try to see whether this particular phobia also has to do with a type of mental health disorder.
So there's a Netflix show called Mr. Iglesias, and in it there's a student who has a severe social anxiety disorder and is unable to speak in class. And so she uses her computer to speak for her. And to be honest, I've not seen the show. My intern told me this, but I thought it was really interesting, and it made me wonder, like, is there such a thing as healthy phone use during the classroom like that? And if so, do you have some more examples of what's good or what's bad use of phone in the class?
That is another important question I'm thinking. There was a time where I was at the parent-teacher conference, and I heard from a mother saying a little bit goes a long way. Technology is a helpful servant, but at the same time, it's a poor master. So we have to be mindful about how often, when, where, how much, and in what context children need to use. And then I agree with what she said, because writing a planner about when to use and when not to use might be useful exercise for young children to bring out self-controls. And we often use this technique when we learn psychological learning. Okay, it has to do with operant conditioning to actually give some reinforcement in between for not using it and paying attention to the lecture, something like that. Some students actually treat their cell phones as a junk food, and they try to record the frequency or duration of time they spend with the cell phone, and then they bring out the chart and evaluate their own behavior with line graph and stuff. That could add to their social media plan, which can be tailored to the age of our student. And then that could actually give some reason to actually think about why healthy phone use is necessary for promoting our learning and possibly memory attention.
I hadn't really planned to ask this question, but I was thinking about learning with phones for college students, really, but you've talked quite a bit about younger students. And so I was wondering, would you give the same advice as far as using cell phones in the classroom for younger students as college students? Or do you think that maybe there's like a certain age where they, when you're younger than a certain age, you shouldn't use technology like that in the classroom or anything like that?
My initial answer is yes. But for younger population, I might do some frequent monitoring to make sure that they are paying attention to the lecture, especially those who are in middle schools compared to college students. Often they have a hard time to regulate their emotion from one to another. So it is always important to send out a constant reminder that, hey, are you watching it? Now we are actually hitting the chapter so and so to learn about more concepts Are you there? And then often the frequent reminder is a help with the, oh, okay, no phone. And I'm listening to what you're saying, that kind of stuff. College students, they're most likely to be adults. So I always set the tone from the very beginning that before the lecture begins, please put your cell phone in your backpack. And then you're more than welcome to use it after the lecture is over, but hope that you can pay attention to the lecture. And then most of the times, then students are able to follow, okay, that procedure. Okay.
Yeah, I was wondering what your policy was in your classrooms. Do your students know that you specialize in this area of research? I wouldn't want to be a student that got caught with a phone in your class.
Surprisingly, not so many students know that I research different topics that's related to psychology. I had a couple of seniors who happened to read my paper, and they were so shocked that I didn't advertise my studies that often. But they were the one turned out to be the messengers who actually shared their thoughts to other students. And ever since that, I got literally down to 0 students who actually pull out their cell phone during the lecture, which is the good thing.
I'm sure students do inevitably just get their phones out from time to time. Some of them, I guess, hide it under their desks like you don't know. And then others just like blatantly will just get out their phone and, just write out in the open and be sending messages or whatever. What do you think instructors should do when they see students doing this? Call them out or talk to them later?
Most schools, if I understand correctly, allow students to have their cell phones for safety. Which seems unlikely to change. However, phones are not just tools for emergencies. Those could be valuable educational tools in the classroom. And I would definitely say there are many benefits by using those. But one important question remains is whether the use of cell phones in school outweighs distraction they cause. And teachers have the authority to set their own cell phone policies in the classroom, and many of them actually has a procedure of the official classroom policy. As long as they explain their rationale to students in a frank discussion, that would be good. Daily reminder may be necessary to reinforce the classroom behavior that instructors would want to see. So it's really up to the instructor, but really the question has to do with whether the use of a cell phone actually outweighs the distraction they cause. That often bring out many debates in the end. Mm-hmm.
Who do you think is responsible for ensuring responsible technology usage? Is it like parents, teachers, students? I'm even wondering if it's the phone manufacturer's responsibility.
That's another interesting question. I would say those who are responsible for ensuring an ethical, inclusive, and sustainable culture they want to move forward are clearly responsible for ensuring responsible technology usage. The evolution of artificial intelligence, we often call it as AI, and other automation capabilities has been playing a really bigger role in life. Now, simultaneously, the risk of inaccuracies and biases with an algorithm could result in serious misrepresentation errors. So that's what I would worry about. But those who are responsible for ensuring sustainable culture, they are the ones who need to make sure when to use and what to use and so forth.
Okay. Well, that's all the questions that I have about cell phones. Is there anything you'd like to add or you think I missed maybe?
Well, as a parent and an educator, I would say keeping their phones safe and being respectable is very important for everybody to be upfront. I also promote the slogan, think before act, is also an important message to those younger generations, especially when we think about teen brain development. We know that the frontal cortex takes time to develop in full maturation, whereas amygdala, which has to do with aggressive behavior, actually explode during the teenage year. And then that could bring out immediate actions, including fears and aggressive behavior. So first of all, we need to understand that our younger generation differ from adults in the way they behave. They also have a different action toward the problem-solving strategy and make decisions. So certain things has to be formed for them to move things forward.
Okay. As I mentioned earlier in the episode, Dr. Lee is also the director of PsyChi's new Faculty Support Advisory Committee. So for anyone wanting to go check out that committee on the website, I'll put a link to it in the show notes for this episode. And I'm also going to put links to the various cell phone articles that we touched on as well, so that you can go and read more about those as well. While I've got Dr. Lee, though, I definitely want to talk about the committee. I think anybody interested in hearing about learning and cell phones would be interested in these other kind of learning educational resources for instructors. Dr. Lee, who exactly is this new faculty support committee intended to support?
We are newly formed the committee beginning in April 2021, although I was appointed to be a director in January. But basically, what we try to do is to support PsyChi members who are in teaching profession. That could be high school teacher who teaches psychology, the graduate teaching assistant who are actually teaching psychology in part-time basis, part-time lecturers, full-time lecturers who are either in 2 years community college or 4-year institution, but those who are in the teaching profession. We also try to support those who are PsyChi faculty sponsors at their university chapters to make our society grow.
Okay. And how did you hear about this? How did you get involved in this committee?
I think it was last year that I saw the call that PsyChi was looking for a director who is to support faculty who are PsyChi members through development, creation, and or identification of resources that promote faculty success and teaching excellence. Since I'm an active member of American Psychological Association and also Society for Teaching Psychology, I was thrilled to have this opportunity to support our members who are in teaching professions. So I applied, and then I luckily got the job. And I honestly think that those who are our members, who are faculty and faculty advisors, they have demonstrated their excellence in many different areas of teaching psychology. So my job is to support them as much as I can. And then I think our committee members are also thinking the same. And then we've been working since spring of this year.
Mm-hmm. What kinds of work is the committee doing right now? Are they making new teaching resources, things like that?
Absolutely. We also try to recognize many different forms of teaching and the teaching related research, and mentorship is also part of the teaching that we value highly. So that comes from our PsyChi faculty members and advisor. And our committee member also represent different region, and then we are currently looking for collaborative work, partnership, and participation opportunities that will benefit PsyChi and our member. But the biggest task we have been doing this year is that we are working on establishing a professional grant that help our members to identify opportunity and relevant resources. And we hope to actually launch the new grant program next year so that our members can apply.
Wow, that's really cool. Are there opportunities to get involved in the committee or volunteer for the committee, things like that?
Absolutely. We are still looking for more members to be involved. One good way is to reach me to my email and ask about it. And another way to get involved is, we have our regional conference and then national conference that gear toward the teaching professions. And those who are active member of those organizations actually can attend, even as a virtual format, they can attend and then have some conversation with us. And then we would love to actually support those folks who are in need.
Okay, well, I'll put a link to your email in the show notes too. And then, like I said, go check out, anyone listening, go check out those web pages as well and see what all you can find.
Sounds great.
You've just listened to another episode of Psych Everywhere. If you haven't already subscribed to Psych Everywhere, go ahead and follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. Tell a friend or a colleague about the show. Word of mouth is a huge help. So, share what you learned the next time you talk on the phone with your closest friend or relative, or in your classes. You can also follow us on Twitter at Psychi Podcast and leave a review at Apple Podcast or wherever you go for podcasts. You'll absolutely make my day, and more importantly, you'll be helping to get Psych everywhere. Okay, that's all for now. I'll connect with you again soon. Copyright 2022, Psychi, the International Honor Society in Psychology. All rights reserved.